Good evening. It is February 15th, and we have our third class with Rabbi Moffic on the teachings of Rabbi David Ellenson. And take it away.
Great. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to see all of you. So tonight's topic is we're going to talk about Zionism. And that was a major issue for David Ellenson and a major issue in American Jewish life today, and obviously something that's on our minds. So just a little clarification of terms. If you think about the word Zionism, it is the movement or ideology of Jewish nationalism, that the faith, the belief that Jews have had and should have and are entitled to a nation state where Judaism can be part of the cultural fabric of the nation. And Zionism is an old, new movement. That's what I like to call it. It's old. So it's old in the sense that it's part of Torah. I mean, if you look at the Torah, the entire Torah, the 5 books of Moses, is all about the journey towards the promised land. Beginning with Abraham, even within the very first, the whole book of Genesis, all the way to the end of Deuteronomy. It's that journey towards the promised land. Now, so that's the old part of it. It was Judaism essentially emerged in a nation state. But then there's sort of a 2,000-year hiatus. And we're not going to do a whole history of the diaspora, but Jews generally lived outside of the land of Israel for a long period of time, not by choice. It was forced. It was the destruction of the temple by the Romans in 70 CE. Now, there were always small Jewish communities in Israel. Usually, there were periods where there weren't, but in general, the vast majority of Jews lived outside of the land of Israel. But that began to change in the late 19th century. This is a very interesting history. Essentially, what was happening in the 19th century was many countries in Europe were becoming countries, nation states. There had always been the German areas, and the Italian areas, and the Polish areas. But the most powerful force in Europe for the Middle Ages and for the beginning, for the first several centuries of, between 1000 and 2000, the most powerful institution was the church. The reason Europe was essentially called the Holy Roman Empire. The church was dominant. But in the 1700s, it really began in the 1600s in the Netherlands, but it started really growing in the 1700s with the French Revolution in 1789, and then essentially the emergence of the German state in the early 1800s. Europe became governed by states, by political nationalities, rather than the church. There's a very famous painting of Napoleon grabbing the crown from the cardinal in France and putting it on his head. I forget who the painter, maybe David. I can't remember who the painter is, but it's very famous. It's symbolic of this grabbing of authority from the church to the state, to the nation state. Now, this is happening in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Initially, this seemed to be a very positive development for Jews, because the idea was Jews would be citizens of a country just like any other citizens. They would be citizens of the Jewish faith. And so as long as they served in the army, paid their taxes, contributed to the community, they could live as equal citizens. That was kind of part of the promise of the French Revolution. But it never turned out that way. Prejudices don't die so easily. So whereas Jews began to have more freedoms, that's indisputable. Jews began to go to secular universities. Jews began to enter the professions. That's kind of what we talked a little bit about last week with the beginnings of Reform Judaism. But there still was pervasive anti-Semitism. And it had a variety of expressions. That Jews were often not hired at major universities for prestigious professorships. Jews were still excluded from certain professions. Jews were excluded from certain universities. Even the term anti-Semitism was sort of actually didn't come into being until 1871, and it was saying that whereas Jews want to be part of our nation state, they're not really part genetically, racially. They're not part of the German Volk and the French sense of self. So Jews wanted to be accepted, and many people wanted to accept Jews, but there was this virulent anti-Semitism that said Jews can never be like us. They're just racially, biologically, ethnically different. So then, what's to happen to the Jewish people? If even after the promise of emancipation and enlightenment, how will Jews survive? So that's where the modern Zionist movement comes. So several smart Jews, the thinkers, the Leo Pinsker, who's in Odessa in 1881, and even before him, Moses Hess, who's a contemporary of Karl Marx. Basically, they say, okay, well, let's use the anti-Semites' logic for our benefit. If every group is entitled to a nation state, i.e. Germans have a nation state, French have a nation state, and we're not really part of the German nation state or the French nation state, they don't accept us, we're too different racially, ethnically, biologically, then we'll have our own nation state. It's like, we can't be part of the Gentile country club, we'll have our own country club, and it'll be a better country club, So we're gonna have our own state, and it's gonna be a better state. It's gonna be the most beautiful, that's Theodor Herzl. So this was this idea that Jews will become modern, will survive through their own state. This is part of the romance. This is the romantic nationalist era of the 19th century. And in fact, so there's sort of two phases of this. The first is in Eastern Europe, where in Odessa in 1881, there's Dr. Leo Pinsker, who says the Tsar is always going to hate Jews. We need our own state. And that's successful. But then the real impetus, the real catalyst for the modern Zionist movement was Theodor Herzl. And Theodor Herzl was, I shared this, in fact, I've shared this before, remind me, but I don't think so, because I shared this with the ninth graders just recently. So we're actually coming up upon one of the anniversaries of the Dreyfus trial. So Theodor Herzl was a newspaper correspondent. He was sort of the equivalent of Thomas Friedman, but in the late 19th century. And he was sent to cover a trial in Paris. This was in 1897.
1894.
1890. Okay, that's what. That's
I'm
the anniversary.
I'm Googling.
Okay, so you're right. So that's what I knew it was some sort of anniversary.
And it was from 1894 to 1906. So
okay, so it was a long trial. Yeah. Maybe Herzl didn't go until 1897. I know the book, The Jewish State, was published in 1897 or 1898. Regardless, it's that time period. Herzl is a foreign correspondent. He goes to cover the trial, and he's shocked. Herzl himself was a very assimilated Jew. He didn't have a bar mitzvah. He grew up in an upper middle class family in Budapest who were Jewish. They lived in a Jewish neighborhood, but he went to a great high school, just like a Highland Park High School or in Trier. He was almost similar to American Jews today. But he saw what was happening in Paris. Paris was considered to be the most enlightened city in the world. And he saw people marching, yelling death to the Jews. He was shocked. He was utterly shocked. Because everybody knew that Dreyfus was not guilty. It was a sham trial. Not like everyone knew OJ was guilty. Everyone knew Dreyfus was not guilty, but yet he was convicted. He was convicted. Now, eventually his conviction was overturned. But there was so much virulent anti-Semitism that Herzl's world was shattered. And he, over the course of a few months, he wrote this book called The Jewish State, or it's actually the better translation is The State of the Jews. And interestingly, this might be apocryphal, but I've heard it several times, so it's interesting if it was true. It was said that while he was writing the book, he would attend Wagner operas in the evening. Of all the people, yet he was inspired by Wagner operas to write the Jewish state. You know, who knows? But anyways, so Herzl writes this book, and it's a tremendous catalyst. Herzl is an extremely charismatic individual. I mean, just out of this world charisma. And he brings together what's called the First Zionist Congress. And he wants to have it in Berlin, which is sort of this great capital city, but both the Reform rabbis and the Orthodox rabbis in Berlin don't want him there. So he ends up having it in, and he requires everybody there, all the men, to wear tuxedos. And it's a very upscale event. And this is sort of the birth of the modern Western Zionist movement. And Herzl is a great negotiator, he's a great leader. He really works to create, he writes a book called Alt Neuland, which is a vision of what the Jewish state would look like. And Herzl was so interesting. He was so assimilated. He never imagined that anyone would speak Hebrew. He believed they would speak German in Israel. I mean, it would be like Vienna, but in the Middle East. In fact, Herzl didn't even think it had to be in the modern state of Israel. He supported a proposal to, Uganda was part of the British Empire, and he supported a proposal that would have the Jewish state in Uganda. He was not religious at all. His was purely a rescue mission. That this was about a safe place for Jews to live. There's even people that supported one in Argentina. It's a very interesting. But he was voted down on the Uganda proposal. And he died shortly thereafter. It might be a connection, I don't know, but he, anyways, he catalyzed this modern Zionism. Now, we're going to talk mostly about America today because that's where Ellenson wrote a lot about. But the Zionist movement never had as big an impact in America as it had in other places. Now, the reason it had an impact, tremendous impact, but different. Zionism was typically understood as requiring, encouraging, highly expecting Aliyah. You are going to move it. To be a Zionist is to ultimately plan to move to the state of Israel. That was, you go, the Zionist movement in Australia is like that. It encourages Aliyah in England, in Eastern Europe. It was all really rooted around Aliyah, but not in America, not at all. Because there was a feeling among American Jews that we are at home in America. And that was, even when there was anti-Semitism in America, it was not the same level that it was in other countries. So American Zionism takes on a different hue. First of all, there's a strongly anti-Zionist movement in America. Mostly sort of German Reform Jews who say America is our Jerusalem, or Washington, D.C. is our Jerusalem, and we don't want to be accused of dual loyalties. Judaism is a religion, it's not an ethnicity, it's not a people, it's not a race, it's a religion, and we want no part in a Jewish state. We are proudly American. Now, we shouldn't be too harsh on them because they were also very charitable towards Israel. But it was a philanthropic commitment, and it was a cultural commitment. It was, I'm happy to support Jewish culture, but I do not support a Jewish state. So that is a strong element in American Judaism. But that eventually diminishes. Even by the end of World War I, we have the Balfour Declaration. And Balfour Declaration, very important piece of history. In 1917, Lord Balfour, either the prime minister or the foreign minister, issues a letter to Lord Rothschild saying Her Majesty's government views, or his, I can't remember, he was king back then, Majesty's government views with favor the establishment of a Jewish national home in historic Palestine. So this is a tremendous statement from a leading Western power of a vision of a Jewish state. And so Zionism in America becomes associated with philanthropy, with supporting the establishment of a Jewish state, supporting the settlers, not moving there, not by any means moving there, but supporting it. And it has a very strong moral element that the Jewish state should embody our highest ideal. It should be a light unto the nation, almost like Reform Judaism saw itself as ethical monotheism, as embodying Jewish values and being a light unto the nation. American Zionists believe that Israel should be a country that is a light unto the nation, especially Louis Brandeis. Louis Brandeis said, with the right Jewish state, there'll be no crime, there'll be no corruption, there'll be, we won't even need police officers. I mean, he writes this. Guy's a little naive, Supreme Court justice, but he really had this absolutely moral vision of the future Jewish state. Yeah, so.
Well, there's been no mention of Henrietta Zoll.
Oh, she's tremendous.
And tremendously with Hadassah and being an extremely women Zionistic organization, and with the things they've done there with the hospital and the medical, especially their medical contributions have been tremendous.
Henrietta Zoll was a very early Zionist in America.
Yes.
And was sort of a bridge. I mean, she was sort of a bridge between the Eastern European, there were tensions in America between the sort of established German Jews and the Eastern European immigrants. And Henrietta Zoll was a great bridge between the two. And she mobilized support for cultural and philanthropic institutions in Israel. It wasn't called Israel yet. It was Palestine, or it was part of the Ottoman Empire, part of the British Empire by then. But yes, Henrietta Zoll. There were so many: Henrietta Zoll, Louis Brandeis, Horace Kallen, Chaim Weizmann, Albert Einstein. These were all early American Zionists. But again, it was not about moving to Israel. It was about supporting Israel in many ways, like American Jews are today. And it hasn't changed all that much. There were also, but Zionism wasn't the only game in town. There was also a movement of, we should revive Jewish life in Europe. After the destruction of World War I, we should support autonomous Jewish communities in Hungary, in Romania, in Poland. That they, there was this tension. There's always tension for money. Who's gonna, there's a lot of fundraising. So should we fundraise for this new Zionist movement in Israel? Or should our funds go to support the Jewish community in Hungary and the Jewish community in Poland? Now, in hindsight, we know the smart move was to give money to Israel, obviously. But at that time, people didn't know. Nobody expected the Holocaust. Nobody nobody had that as the potential. So there were differing visions of what the Jewish future in Europe would look like. And they competed. I mean, the American Jewish Committee and the American Jewish Congress were two sort of competing organizations. The American Jewish Committee was a little less Zionist, whereas the American Jewish Congress was very Zionist. Now, the American Jewish Congress doesn't exist anymore. It's essentially went bankrupt, unfortunately. But these were sort of two competing Jewish institutions. Now, by the 1930s, things had really gotten to the point where Zionism was sort of the established, the anti-Zionist sentiment was declining. There still were anti-Zionists, by all means, but as anti-Semitism started rising in America, I mean, 1930s, if you look back in the 1930s, it's the most anti-Semitic period in American history. Worse than today. Well, today's bad, but today it's fringe. It's not totally fringe. It's less fringe than it was 10 years ago. But in the 1930s, you had openly anti-Semitic radio preachers. Henry Ford, he was the Jeff Bezos of his time, the Elon Musk of his time, and he was virulently anti-Semitic. So you had much more established anti-Semitism. And so you had greater American Jewish support for the state of Israel. And of course, you had the rise of Hitler. And so there was a growing sense that Europe could not be a home for the Jewish people. Yeah, there were still Jewish anti-Zionists by all means. But by the end of World War II, that was generally over. Again, there are fringe, there are some, but there was a feeling that after this horror, after the loss of 6 million Jews, what alternative is there but for there to be a Jewish state? So you have the Jewish state established in 1948, you can go into all that history. But then, interestingly, in America, if you go back and look at religious schools and synagogues in the 1950s, there is not much discussion of Israel. Interesting. Even, it's not just Reform, it's conservative and Orthodox too. It's almost as if the horror of the Holocaust was so vast that we couldn't really grapple with that. And of course, the state of Israel is connected. So American Jewish schools in the 1950s were much more focused on sort of American Judaism, going to synagogue on Friday night, almost like people go to church on Sunday morning, going to synagogue on Friday night, being with family, enjoying meals together. It wasn't really focused on Israel. Of course, there was philanthropy. There was absolute, people did visit. I mean, it's not like it was remote. It's not like no one talked about it. It just wasn't central in the way one might have thought it would be.
They didn't talk about the Holocaust either.
Exactly. It was almost, I mean, I hate to say it because it's almost embarrassed. Some people were embarrassed by the Holocaust. Yeah.
I don't know, I might be the only one here who was actually in Sunday
good.
school in
Talk about it.
1948.
Yeah.
And we had our blue boxes for Karen and me. I've still got that blue
Yes.
box.
Yes.
I think
That's an antique. It's worth something.
So
Well, it's
no, 100%. It was philanthropic. It was, we are supporting this.
right,
100%.
right,
That existed. But it's not like there were trips to Israel like there are now.
right.
That kind of, that didn't really start. It started Solel in the 1960s, in the early 1960s. The confirmation class would go to Israel for the entire summer, funded by the synagogue. It doesn't happen anymore. It was pretty amazing, It was way ahead of its time. There weren't many synagogues, but so starting in the early 1960s, began to get the state of Israel began to become more central to American Jews. It might not have been so central earlier because remember, we were in the midst of the Cold War and Israel was a socialist country. So Israel was aligned with the United States, but it was also in many ways aligned with the Soviet Union. When Israel became a state in 1948, the United States immediately recognized it. 2 minutes later, the Soviet Union recognized it. So Israel was sort of caught in between. But by the early 1960s, the alignment was becoming clear. The Arab world, Egypt was a strong Soviet ally, and Israel was becoming a strong American ally. So you began to have more comfort with talking and connecting with Israel. So actually, beginning in the early 1960s, people began to travel there more. I can't tell you, I actually talked to many. When did you and Dick first go? Was it?
Oh, we didn't go until the 80s.
Okay, the 80s. But people a little older
I'm
than.
going to tell you.
Yeah.
He would have gone. I was afraid.
Yeah.
Because there were all these bus bombings, everything else going on there.
No, that's true.
And I was afraid to go. So he didn't. But then our daughter went there between her junior and senior year, I was just telling Vanessa, and worked on a moshav.
Yeah.
And I, Dick had been president of UJA in Aurora and everything. And our daughter came, she says, I can't believe you do all this work for Israel and you've never gone.
That's a good point.
So we went.
That's good.
And we took the family.
Yeah.
And then, I've been there 5 or 6 times,
Right.
but,
that's good. It's a good example. People began to travel there more frequently in the early, like my grandparents, I think, went there first in 1964 or 1966. I can't remember. But that was becoming, people began to travel there more in the early 60s. Again, travel was also harder back then too. I mean, it got easier in the 80s. Travel was a big travel is a big deal, so, but the larger picture I'm trying to say is Israel started becoming more a part of the American Jewish consciousness in the early 60s. But then it skyrocketed in 1967. 1967 is a key turning point in the history of American Judaism. Basically, anti-Zionism is totally dead after 1967. There are no, I mean, I guess there are always a few, but there are really no organizational people that are opposed to the state of Israel. The American Jewish Committee, which had initially been non-Zionist, federations, which had been, federations used to focus much more of their money on social services in cities. They still do, but that was the primary focus in the 50s and early 60s. Starting in 1967, Israel becomes absolutely central to American Jewish identity. And of course, there's a few reasons. This is actually from, Ellenson has written about this, and as a sociologist and a historian, there's a lot of complex factors. First, probably the top one, is fear of a second Holocaust. In the 6-Day War, there was a fear that Israel would be destroyed and Jews would be pushed into the Mediterranean Sea. You had all these Arab countries funded and supported by the Soviet Union that surrounded. So there was real fear. And so this idea that it was combined with that fear was a sense of that could be me. If my family hadn't immigrated here, decades ago, that could be me right there. And I can't allow that to happen. Second, American Jews had by then achieved a decent level of success. There's no question. American Jews were established in the suburbs, like here in Highland Park. They were professionals, lawyers, doctors, so forth. Not to the level of today, but there had been we were a more established community, so we could give. There was a sense of this is our responsibility. We are the largest. There's no other. The buck stops here. There's no other group that can help Israel at this time, not us. And we failed in the Holocaust. There was a very strong sense that American Jews did not do enough during the Holocaust. I mean, that's a tremendous feeling of guilt. So we haven't. I know at the history of Solel, they took out a mortgage on the building was paid off. They took out a mortgage on the building, and I remember somebody telling me, he's since died. He was a wonderful man. That they were planning to get new carpeting in their home right around the time. I guess carpet. I've never gotten new carpeting, but it was expensive. And instead, he said, "We're not going to do that. We give all the money we were going to spend. We're going to donate it to the Israel campaign." And so there was a real sense of sacrifice for the country. And so that created a very strong connection between American Jews and Israel that became part of, that still exists. The Hebrew Union College, the Year in Israel program, where all rabbinical students spend their first year in Israel, that starts right after the 6-Day War. And this is a time when people begin to travel or to spend a year or a summer in Israel working on a kibbutz. David Ellenson did that. I'm going to read something he wrote on that. Just talk about your daughter. And Bernie Sanders spent a year on a kibbutz. If you think about it, it's sort of a combination of the social activism of the 1960s, because kibbutzim were socialists. They were about sharing, and also the ethnic identity feeling that was emerged in the 1960s: civil rights, feminism, and a sense of Jewish identity and cultural expression. All of that really played into the relationship between the American Jews and Israel. But there was also still a very strong moral sense that Israel is going to embody the best in Jewish values. It's going to stand for justice. It's going to stand for peace. And that starts to create tension because Israel is changing too. In 1977, you have the first non-labor government in Israeli history. So you have the Likud, which is led by Menachem Begin, who was considered a terrorist by many among American Jews, is elected the prime minister. It's like the Bibi Netanyahu of that period. I mean, so it's very shocking. So you have, and then you have, starting really in the early 1970s, 1972 Olympics is obviously the key example. You have this Palestinian terrorism, Black September, which is the precursor to the PLO. I mean, it's so Israel becomes, while there is this incredible romance and connection, there are a lot of tensions. There's a tension between, will Israel be a strong military power with lots of settlements and persecuting Palestinians? Will it be able to deal with all the terrorism? Will it still be a military power after getting embarrassed during the Yom Kippur War? Even though Israel essentially wins the Yom Kippur War, it suffered tremendous losses. In some ways, similar to what's happening now. It's clear that Israel is achieving objectives rather slowly, but if you look at the grand scheme of things, it's a tremendous loss. So that tension is there, but there's still a very strong emotional connection between American Jews and Israel, in part because we know that there's no one who will support Israel in the same way American Jews do. I mean, really, they're who would? There's no other. The two biggest communities in the world, the biggest Jewish communities in the world, are America and Israel. The rest, other Jewish communities are very marginal. Canada, France, Australia, they have Jewish communities, but the entire Jewish community of England is smaller than the Jewish community of Chicago. I mean, it's not really a relevant part of the global Jewish institutional structure. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, it leaves us with a lot of questions about what does it mean to be an American Jew and to be a Zionist. That's a very complicated, it's complicated because somebody like David Ellenson, and probably most people here in this room, the view of Israel is one as an underdog and a moral exemplar that was almost destroyed in the 6-Day War, that has strived to be a place that has built itself up, that has saved Jews from all over the world, that rescued Ethiopian Jews in the late 1980s, early 1990s, that brought in many Soviet Jews in the late 1980s, early 1990s. That Israel has been, not perfect, but has generally been a light unto the nations, fulfilled that original vision of American Zionism. There are many American Jews that feel that and believe that and promote that. But there's also more and more Jews who believe Israel is an oppressive power and is not the underdog, but is the aggressor. And that is generally people maybe my age and younger, a little younger. But there is this tension between what does it mean to be Jewish and to be a Zionist. And the tension is even greater now. Now, one might have thought that the events of October 7th would at least quiet down the debate, that people who were questioning whether American Jews should be supportive of Israel would at least quiet down for a little while. That has not happened. It's actually gotten worse. It really has. I mean, we have kids of members of our synagogue who participate in very strong anti-Israel protests in DC, in Chicago. It's very sad. Parents they're pained by it, but it's their kids. It's want to love them and all this, but it is a tremendously difficult period. And that's why I think there is some wisdom in talking about what does it mean to be an American Zionist? Or a better phrase, what does it mean to be an American Jew or to be a Zionist? And is anti-Zionism essentially the same thing as anti-Semitism? That is an interesting. What do you think?
That's a hard question.
Very good question.
I took Rabbi Serrata's Israel class this week, and I started with, I have a very romantic relationship with Israel.
Mhm.
And, I said that to all the people in the room, I remember 67, 73, and Tevi. My personal children have only known Netanyahu as the prime minister. They've seen Israel as an aggressor. And, they say things that absolutely break my heart. And my daughter said, don't tell her I told you this, but she was with all of her camp friends. She goes, yeah, we're not going to talk about Israel. They've really, I
This
think
is someone who went to Jewish day school and Jewish summer.
Jewish day school, Jewish, she did everything Jewish. And she spent a year in Israel, a half a year.
Yeah.
And has visited many times. I mean, she's not and her name is Lital. So it's very, 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 very hard. It's very hard for me to watch as a parent. But I realize that we have to reach out to that generation because we don't want to turn them off altogether.
I think the problem is with them is they don't know the history. They don't have the memories that some of us have. They don't realize that the Arabs from day one never wanted the state of Israel to exist as a Jewish state. And they caused trouble from day one. And I think if the young people could realize that, they would know, they need to know our history. And I think that's a big problem is the education.
Well, I will tell you that
your kids probably know.
My kids do know, and they came home and said, you lied to me, you didn't tell me the other side. I mean, there is, and we're discussing it a little bit in the Wednesday class. I mean, it's not a black and white thing when you look at the history of Israel and why did the Palestinians leave and who are the Palestinians and all of that.
I think more even education is, of course, critical. There's also a philosophical and a cultural impact. American Jews today, people my age and younger primarily, grew up with very little, not much to worry about. That's it's a truism. I mean, guess September 11th, but that was, it was horrible, but it didn't really affect most people's lives directly unless their parents worked there. But there wasn't a 6-day war. There wasn't a Holocaust. There wasn't Vietnam or any real tough things that sort of made you realize that the world is somewhat of a dangerous place. And so I think that now that's not true now. COVID, I think, that affected kids in a very powerful way. That's a different story. We don't know how that's going to play out in the future. But I think it's a certain naivete that most people in the world view other people like Americans view other people, like we're, are multicultural and loving and supportive and are curious and love their kids. And there's sort of this view that there isn't really evil and violence in the world. And so it's a certain kind of, it's almost a philosophical, it's not having the cultural background and experiences that earlier generations had and having a different understanding. Plus, this is very important. This is something Ellenson writes about that I think is very, very important. Religion has a bad image. When people think of Israel often, they think of ultra-Orthodox settlers that are shooting at Palestinians, destroying their olive trees, are prejudiced and racist and very insular. And that is the view of Judaism. And there is some legitimacy to that. I hate to say it, there is some legitimacy to it. mean, we have most of us here probably have more in common with, an Episcopalian, Presbyterian, American than with ultra Orthodox in Israel. It's just, there's extreme racism. Not even, it's more than racism. It's anybody who's not Jewish is lesser than. And that is the image that's promoted. So that's one side. The other side is the religious right in America. Religion in the 1980s and 1990s became associated with homophobia, with anti-abortion, with everything bad. It's sort of you think of the Christian Coalition and Pat Buchanan and Ralph, that was the image of religion in public life. So people who saw that, who grew up with that, became, in a sense, anti-religious. If that's what religion is about, I don't want any part of it. I want the opposite. Again, I see that with kids in the congregation. Kids they're not really anti-Jewish, but they're anti a fundamentalist expression of my religion. And for some people, that includes believing in a state that that's too much. My religion is about being a good person. It's not about, having a country, or especially if that country is oppressing other people. And so it's kind of a transformation of what religious commitment means. And I blame religion for a lot of that.
I think it's also anti-institutional,
Yes.
especially the millennials. They didn't, you talked about sororities and fraternities, all those things. They're not joiners. They're, they're old folk bowling for one. I think that colors their view of religion.
I think you're absolutely right. That's right. Yeah.
So, just from personal experience, I've got 2 millennials and a Gen Z. Okay, and my Gen Z, name is Jen, it really shocked us because she said, I thought you guys were always exaggerating things, about the Holocaust and all these other things. I never saw it until, after October 7th. And seeing what's happening in the world, I understand what happened in Germany. I understand that things could like this happen again. I never realized it until that point. Because again, I think what you're saying is the kids of that generation are so protected. And again, they're getting all their news from TikTok and what have you. At least the generation ahead of that, the millennials, not as much, quite. They're a little bit more influenced by us parents, I think, but the Gen Zs at this point are very separated from their parents because they're getting all their information.
Yeah, I know. Believe me, I know. Yeah.
You got them as well, yeah.
Yes. And the world. This is something to consider. A sort of counterfactual. I can almost guarantee you that there could not be. Israel could not be if there was no Israel created in 1948, there could not be one created today. Think about it. In 1948, the United Nations supported the creation of a Jewish state. Now the United Nations can't even condemn terrorism against it. We are in a vastly different world. In some ways, everything's become political. It's the idea of oppressed and oppressor. And that is the worldview by which you have to look at everything. So if you look in a very narrow way, in Israel, one could say, I don't agree with this characterization, but I could see how someone could arrive at it, that Jews are the oppressor and the Palestinians are the oppressed. You can come to that point of view. And without any knowledge of history, one could take a clear perception that this is clearly a case of injustice and we have to fight it. And Zionism is seen as negative, even though its early promise. I mean, the Zionist movement, if you read the declaration, I should have printed out the declaration. I thought I did. But I didn't print out that best part. Essentially promising the prophetic universal, that the state of Israel shall be a home for all its citizens, all its residents. It's a Jewish state, but not only for Jews. It's a place of justice for all its residents. And that's something that Zionism aspires to. And it is true that Arabs in Israel have more rights than Arabs in virtually any other country. I mean, it's shocking. I mean, you can't really vote in Saudi Arabia. I guess they have certain sham votes, but but you can in Israel. There's an Arab Supreme Court justice. So that Israel is sort of caste type, stereotype as this aggressive power, and sometimes, certain Jews contribute to that image. Let's see, okay. Any other comments about, is anti-Zionism the equivalent of anti-Semitism? Agree or disagree? Anybody? What do you think about it?
In part, sure, because you've got double standards all over the place. You can see it in the news virtually every day.
Yeah, agreed.
Look at what happened in Yemen, right? 300,000 people killed in that revolution. Have you seen one protest, one revolution? Has it been covered by the news? Of course not. Right. Syria, millions of people. The number of people that are, have been kicked out of every one of these countries, 100 million refugees across the world. The only ones that are focused on right now are the Palestinians. And they're kept that way by the UN specifically. Specific groups in the UN that keep them as refugees. They are still classified as refugees, even if they move to another country and become a citizen of another country. They're refugees because their homeland
Their
is
grandparents.
Nobody wants them.
Yeah, but even if they are wanted, the double standards are just absolutely incredible when it comes to that.
For sure. I want to read you something. This is from something David Ellenson wrote in 2014. And it's sort of it's almost returning to that romantic vision of Zionism. And I think it's something that we need to remind ourselves of. The legacy of our religious tradition's emphasis on justice, as well as our Reform Jewish commitment to morality and ethics, makes Israel the ultimate testing ground for the truth of Jewish teachings and values. However, nothing should obscure or deny the religious significance the state possesses by virtue of the sheer fact of its existence. 2 decades ago, for a year, I lived at Mishmar HaEmet, a kibbutz of Hashomer HaTzair, located in the Jezreel Valley next to Megiddo. Very secular kibbutz. Most of the kibbutz are secular. They were. On many afternoons, after the day's work had been completed, I would walk up into the hills of the kibbutz. There I would gaze out onto the valley below. And each time when I looked, I would see the orchards and the irrigation pools, the cotton fields and the trees, the factories and the roads, and most of all, the people. And I would think of the words with which the prophet Amos concluded his preachments to the people of Israel. "The time is coming, declares the Lord. I will restore my people, Israel. They shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them." I would be deeply moved. However, no blessing would emerge, for I was never sure, despite the prophecy, if what I saw was the work of God or of people. Interesting. Perhaps I now think it does not matter. For how, in assessing the meaning of Israel, can one distinguish between the sacred and the profane, the religious and the secular? Furthermore, why should one try? After some time on the top of the hill, I would return to the kibbutz, and there I would see families sitting together and talking on the lawn. I would watch little children tumble and run after one another, screaming all the time in Hebrew. At this point, the words of the Shehechianu would silently form in my heart and escape from my lips. In those moments, my spirit moved me instinctively to thank God for the Kiddush HaChaim, sanctification of life, that the Jewish state and Jewish existence embody. Our people's return to our land is not simply mythic. It has taken on flesh and blood. And to celebrate that fact is to applaud much more than mythic renewal. It is to acknowledge that the rebirth of Jewish life embodied in the state of Israel is fraught with religious import and significance. The Jewish people have returned to history with a degree of power unknown for the previous 2 millennia. That's very important. I want to come back to that. Reform Zionism needs to know and affirm the religious significance of this fact. The monism of universalism must be rejected. Our Zionism must be built on the dialectical foundations of universalism and particularism and the interplay between. Both poles must be accorded religious legitimacy by our movement, for only then can a platform be constructed in which each can inform and at times provide a corrective for the other. In so doing, a new ground for our Reform Zionism will be established. Now, I love this for a couple reasons. Because what he says that the Reform Jewish approach to Zionism is a unique approach, in that on the Orthodox side, it's very conservative, it's very fundamentalist. God promised us the land of Israel. We are settling the land of Israel, and it is our country. And if Palestinians want to live with us in peace, fine. If not, they can live somewhere else. It is very much, and this is not all Orthodox. I'm going to tell you, I'm stereotyping some, of course, but it's generally that is the religious Zionist perspective. It wasn't always like that. Before 1960, again, I don't have enough time to get into the whole history, but essentially, before 1967, the Orthodox religious Zionists were much more peacenik. They were generally on the pro-peace side. It was the birth of the settlement movement after the Six-Day War that sort of radicalized Orthodox Judaism and Orthodox Zionism to today, where it's very much, very, very strict, very much about settlements, and the law of the state has to be followed, but it can be circumvented, and we can build settlements. I mean, one of my mom's best friends, her son was a Baal Teshuva, so he became very, very religious and moved to Israel, has like 4 or 5 kids, refuses to teach them English. Obviously breaks his parents' hearts because they moved to Israel because they want to be close to their grandchildren. But they see the grandchildren, but the grandchildren can't speak English. So it's sort of sad. I feel terrible, but this is, and he lives on a settlement, way out. But anyways, that is sort of the Orthodox view. It's very much a fundamentalist religious Zionism. And the secular Zionism, which is very strong, and probably we feel more comfortable, believes that Jews are a people, a nation, but really has very little to do with religion. Sure, Jewish culture, that's part of who we are. But if you go to Israel, very few people actually go to services on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Only the Orthodox. I remember walking back. It was kind of fun, actually. It was walking back from, it was either Kol Nidre or Rosh Hashanah. I can't remember. It must have been Kol Nidre. Walking back, we were at services at the school. Walking back, in the whole neighborhood where I lived, it was a beautiful neighborhood, German colony. No cars on the street. It was just families and kids out skateboarding, talking, socializing. When people weren't eating, but so they were fasting. But it was much more of sort of a social, almost a day off. It was a vacation day, and that's true across the board. So Judaism may be the foundation of the country, but it's an ethnicity and a philosophy, not a religion.
Why do you think Israel is so different? I mean, they're secular, but I mean, most liberal Jews are reasonably secular in this country. But high holy days, boy, everybody comes out of the woodwork, right?
I think it's because America is this is going to sound strange, but it's true. America is a more religious country than Israel. Think about that for a second. Not the Orthodox. The Orthodox in Israel are very religious. But the overall in America, still, it's less than 50%, but something like 47% of people go to church on a somewhat regular basis. And our politics, I mean, we still say, God bless America. America is still becoming less so. So I don't know how long, but there is a religious element. Would an atheist do you think an atheist could be elected president? Maybe now. Maybe. It's possible now because neither Obama or Trump ever went to church very much. Whereas before, presidents were kind of expected to go to church. Now Biden does, because he has his whole life, and he's but neither Obama or Trump were very, so, but there is still an element in in America that's strongly religious. So I think Jews on the high holy days, just like Christians come out of the woodwork to go on Easter and Christmas, Jews come to go on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
So it's all about guilt.
That's a big part of it.
But I
You
think,
know what, as long as they pay dues, I'm happy.
I think the big difference is, though, in Israel, it's part of the curriculum in all the schools. Torah is taught as literature,
Yeah.
so they know Bible, they know and Bible, I'm talking about Torah, prophets, and the writings. So, it's
It's culture. It's just not religious. I mean, most Israeli kids who are not, or they don't have bar mitzvahs. I mean, Reform has tried to encourage some, but it doesn't happen very much. If they do, it often is sort of a pro forma Orthodox bar mitzvah.
I once went to a Reform bar mitzvah in Haifa with, Edgar Knopf.
Oh yeah, he's
And
a good guy.
they called up the brother for an aliyah, and he was stumbling over the Torah blessing. And I said to someone, I can see that in America. I don't need to see that here.
So it's very, but what Ellenson is trying to do is carve out a Reform Zionism to say there is sacredness. Israel is more than just another country that happens to be filled by Jews. It has significance, given what happened in the Holocaust, given our whole history going back to the Torah. Israel is more than just a country, but it's not a religion. It's not a theocracy. It's not a theocracy. It's that middle ground.
We don't have a pope.
No, exactly. We don't have a pope, and we don't, and we're not trying to create this is not simply a totally ethnic state. We're not trying to be a Jewish version of Iran or Saudi Arabia. We are global. It's a global country with people of all different, you go to the Tel Aviv bus station, you see people of every different color, it's a beautiful thing. And we should celebrate that. So it's not strictly secular, but it's not a theocracy. It's this middle ground. And that's what I love about this. And that's what I think is the beauty of a Reform Jewish approach to science. Okay, we covered a lot of ground. Any questions?
Thank you.
I have a
Yeah.
question for
Yeah.
everybody. Arabs are Semites,
Yes?
so why is anti-Semitism only against Jews?
Yeah. That was just the nomenclature. The person who created the term anti-Semitism, German named Wilhelm Marr, who started the League of Anti-Semites, and he just, he was targeting Jews.
It sounded
But yes.
more scientific.
Yes. Yes,
It sounded more scientific than the same. I don't like this.
exactly. It sounded more polite and scientific. To say, yeah. I don't like Semites.
You know, that they do.
And the real truth is, I just go back. I mean, Jews and Arabs generally throughout most of history got along fine. Until the 19th century, if you were Jewish, you would much rather live in a Muslim country than a Christian country. There were no crusades in Muslim countries. There was no Inquisition. There was no Holocaust. That all happened in Christian Europe. But sadly, the tension between Jews and Muslims have never been worse. But it doesn't have to be that way. So it wasn't that way through a lot of, the golden age of Spain was one of Muslim-Jewish cooperation. So anyways, we can hold out some hope for that. Yeah.
Question for you about KM versus Sinai in terms of the development of Zionism. Give us a brief background of that.
Well, the German Jews were not, okay, KM and Sinai were both German Jewish congregations in Chicago. KM was earlier. Sinai was a little more radical, but they were both sort of German Jewish and generally anti-Zionist. But what happened was the rabbis diverged. In the early 20th century, Sinai had two rabbis, Emil Hirsch and Louis Mann, who were both pretty anti-Zionist. Emil Hirsch was very anti-Zionist, but he was a very devoted social justice champion, in America. And he was also, he almost got fired. He had been the rabbi there. He's the most famous and highest paid rabbi in America. He almost got fired because he was essentially pro-German through most of World War One. Because
Yes.
his family was from Germany. And he was, they celebrated German culture. But finally, the congregation said, you gotta shut your mouth. You can't be talking like this because you're in the middle of a war. He wasn't, there were other Reform rabbis. But anyways, that's interesting. Louis L. Mann was he was sort of not Zionist at all. Whereas KAM had two wonderful rabbis, first Solomon Freehawk and then Jacob Weinstein, who were both very strong Zionists. And so even though the two congregations had similar backgrounds, they merged sort of differently.
I think coming out of Germany with again, full-time and Geiger kind of splitting
Yes.
on that. Okay.
Yes. And Sinai really didn't become radical until Hirsch. Hirsch was radical. He took the Torah out of there was no Torah scroll in the sanctuary. It was donated to the University of Chicago. That's University of Chicago's first Jewish library came from M.L. Hirsch, and he included the Torah scroll. But he did have a great joke. Yeah, anyone ever been to the University Club of Chicago? Hey, it's beautiful. For most of its history, it was very anti-Semitic. No Jews. Now they have Jewish members. I've eaten lunch there. They have Jewish members. But one time, M.L. Hirsch was asked to speak there. We went to speak there, and we said, "Oh, Dr. Hirsch, there's a Hebrew inscription by the door. Can you translate it for us?" And we said, "Yes, absolutely." Because he said, "It says, no Jews allowed." Well, he was quick.
So I heard something funny yesterday, which has nothing to do with any of this, except how little some non-Jewish people, I would say, I guess Christians, Gentile people, how little they really know about Judaism as a rule.
That's why he writes books.
Yeah.
I visited a friend yesterday. Well, I was invited to play canasta at the Bee from a friend of mine who lives there. And she told me that their chef decided to make the fillet fish for the Jewish people there.
That's nice.
Guess what? He put shellfish in it.
Oh, neat. Oh, boy. Yeah, you're right.
Is that hilarious or
People
not?
don't know. People don't know. You're absolutely right. All right, everybody.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Good night,
Good
good
night.
night.
Worry about next week. So.
Okay. Okay.
But